to this PIARC webinar, Gender Inclusion in the Transport Sector. Good afternoon, and at least in Paris it's afternoon, and good morning and good evening to all of you who are in other places in the world. This webinar is important, of course, because we're going to talk about gender inclusion, which is important. And we're very happy to have a distinguished set of speakers and also a large group of people listening in. My name is Lina Granlund, and I'm working at PIARC General Secretariat with, among other things, promotion of gender inclusion and diversity. And I will, just before we get started with the seminar, I will just run you through the agenda very briefly, and then also give you some housekeeping rules about the webinar. So the program today is, as you can see, a small introduction, and then we will have a welcome, an introduction to PIARC from the Secretary General of PIARC. And then we have four very interesting speakers from different parts of the world and with different perspectives on gender inclusion in the transport sector. And they will give their presentations, and then there will be possibilities for everyone to ask questions and to engage and to take part and ask and give remarks. The program today will be moderated by Emanuela Stocchi, and she is the co-chair of the PIARC Promotion of Gender Inclusion and Diversity team. And before we go on to this interesting program, let's just look at some of the rules for this participation in the webinar. Your camera and microphone must be remained off during the webinar. And you can ask questions in the chat at any time. And we will save all the questions for the last part of the seminar. So every presenter will give their presentation, and you can ask questions in the chat, but then it will be asked at the end. And of course, depending on the number of questions, we don't know if the speakers can talk about them all. And if you are not used to using Zoom, you can also, a little tip is to close the chat window, and you'll have the full screen, and then you can choose either to look at the speaker or to see all of the participants. But then, since people are going to have their cameras switched off, it's going to be a lot of black boxes mainly. And how do you ask a question in the chat? You use a chat feature in Zoom. It's can be found at the bottom right of the main window under chat. Yes. And you send a message to all the participants. And if you want to direct the question to someone, you write their name as well. And then also, we recommend all the participants in the seminar to have their first name, last name, and country or organization in the Zoom name, so that we can know who we are integrating with. And to do that is you just right click on your own image, and then you can press rename, and then you can change your name if you need. And then lastly, the seminar is being recorded. And it will be made public on our website and on the YouTube channel as well. And with those short housekeeping rules, I will leave the floor, or maybe more accurately the screen, to Patrick Maléjac, the Secretary General of PIARC. And let me just
Good morning and good evening and good afternoon to everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and to see some unfamiliar faces. And I'm so very happy to see not only women in the room, because these topics are very relevant for everyone, every human being, I would say. So I will introduce you to PIARC. So Lina, if you could move to the next slide, please. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with PIARC, we are also called the World Road Association. We were founded more than 110 years ago as a non-profit, non-political association. We are actually older than the United Nations, if you think of it. Our objective is very simple. It's to organize the exchange of knowledge, policy, and practice on all matters related to roads and road transport. The way we do that is to organize committees of experts. They work on topics that have been identified as priorities by our members, and those experts, they talk, they compare best practice, they share ideas, they sometimes disagree, and they encompass and include all of this knowledge into reports that we share publicly and freely. And they also organize seminars and workshops to disseminate that knowledge and to interact with local experts. We have about 2,000 members. The lead members of PIARC are member governments from all over the globe, 125 member governments as of today. And we really pay a lot of attention to placing high-income experts and low-income experts on equal footing. This is why, for example, we organize seminars in low and middle-income countries. But we also have private sector companies as members, universities, regions, and individuals. So you're all very welcome to join if you want to join PIARC. Next slide, please. So you may wonder, why are we even talking about roads today? Because roads in some parts of the world are not very fashionable at all. Well, roads and road transport are essential and they keep improving. Today, in many countries, roads represent about 80% of all inland transport. It's a snapshot, but this is likely to remain more or less the case for the foreseeable future. Maybe in some years from now, rail transport or waterway transport will take away freight or passenger transport from roads, but today it's not the case. And this is why roads remain key for equity, inclusivity, and accessibility, which are very important sustainable development goals of the United Nations. For example, if a little girl in a village needs to go to school in the village across the valley, well, she will probably take a bus, and that bus will probably drive on the road. And this is why also roads are ready to support sustainable and low carbon developments. For example, active modes, if you cycle, this is probably going to be on a road. Car sharing services, they need roads. Public transport like buses, not all of them, but buses need roads. And alternative fuels that are being discussed actively, and this is really a good thing, like electric vehicles, LNG in some cases, or even hydrogen. Well, the alternative fuels for vehicles like trucks and cars that drive on roads. So it's a snapshot. Maybe the future will be different, but we cannot forget about this 80%. There are many reports and tools available about roads. They've been around for thousands of years, and these tools can always be improved. Besides, society's priorities and the larger context in which we are working are evolving very quickly. Are people willing to pay? How much? How do we adjust to climate change? This is why we need to continue working on a large range of topics, and we do that through more than 20 committees of experts. Next slide, please. I told you that we publish reports. Here are a few. I don't expect you to read this slide, but just note that those reports are available for free from our website. Just look at this one called Diversity and Talent Management in Transport Administrations. This has been published recently by one of our committees. It may be relevant for you if you care about human resources, for example. Next slide, please. And it was prepared by this committee, 1.1, called Performance of Transport Administrations, which is led by Christos Xenofontos, who is one of our audience members today. Next slide, please. I don't want to take too much of your time, so I will just present very, very briefly why this webinar today is very relevant for PIARC, because we have two streams of work ongoing on gender inclusion. The first one is to establish recommendations for the road community. This is what we do at PIARC in general, about tunnels, about pavements. We're also going to prepare recommendations for our members about how to better include gender considerations in their road projects, in their human resource departments, and in every single angle of their work. This is dealt with in Committee 1.1, and they are going to prepare a report that is expected at the end of this year. In particular, I would like to highlight that this is building on a really good foresight session that we organized during our recent World Road Congress in Abu Dhabi in October 2019. So if there's anyone from the World Bank, the ITF, International Labour Union, IRF Geneva, and the other stakeholders, I think, in the room, thank you very much. And I'm really glad this happened well, already 2.5 years ago. The other stream for PIARC and gender inclusion is to make sure that these considerations are built into everything we do at PIARC as an organization. Our board, executive committee, decided to set up a team about 1 year ago with one objective, which is to develop a strategy which will be approved by our decision-making bodies. Then those measures and those values will be built into the work we will conduct. And maybe we will have guidelines in the near future about how we should operate. Do we want to make sure that we always have female speakers in our webinars, for example? And are there other practical measures or not longer term measures that need to be considered? So 2 different streams. One, recommendations for the road community across the world. And the second is recommendations for PIARC as one particular organization. This is what I wanted to share with you. I realized I didn't really introduce myself. I'm the Secretary General of PIARC, and I'm really glad to be here with you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And now we will move to the session with the speakers, and there we will have Emanuela Stocchi, that is the Director of International Affairs at ISCAT, Italy, and she's also a member of PIARC's Executive Committee, as well as one of the co-chairs of the Promotion of Gender Inclusion and Diversity team that Patrick just talked about, that was initiated last year. So Emanuela, I will leave the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Lina, and greetings to everyone. Welcome to this PIARC webinar on the gender diversity and inclusion, co-organized together with our team, and also, as Patrick was saying, with the Technical Committee 1.1. Lina already introduced me. I'm happy to say that I'm active in PIARC, and I have this great honor to co-chair the team on promotion of gender diversity and inclusion together with my colleague Wildt Persson. I have the great pleasure of moderate this webinar today, and to have this distinguished panel of women committed in the transportation sector. So thanks for having accepted to lend your time and your expertise for the webinar. And a big thanks to the PIARC Secretariat, and especially to Lina, who assisted me a lot in organizing this meeting. As Patrick was correctly pointing out, yes, our team was created in June 2021 as a sort of a permanent group to the PIARC Executive Committee, with members from all around the world, so representing also the international perspective of PIARC. As Patrick was said, yes, we are going to elaborate, to draft a strategy, a proposal for a strategy on gender inclusion and diversity for PIARC. We were reflecting on that, and we say that while transport and including the road transportation is not gender neutral, as you all know. And of course, gender inclusion is one of the many diversity issues, and one of the most important and the most evident for the road sector. So this is the focus of our team so far, but of course, other diversity aspects will appear and will be addressed by our team as a part of the overall strategy. We believe that to ensure an inclusive transportation system that embeds and embraces the needs of all the users, it must be a multitude of perspectives, and the contribution of the female professional is important, is essential. PIARC, as an international organization, needs to remain relevant and effective. Therefore, the gender inclusion and the wider diversity must be at the heart of PIARC. And in this regard, we have also, we do believe that the international cooperation is also key and added value, while the United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development has the gender equality in its structure. Also other international organizations. Today we have also the opportunity to have an International Transport Forum, TRB. I think also about IBTTA with the women in tolling. They have already implemented successful programs in this area. So we think that it's good for us also to start a fruitful cooperation with such international organizations dealing with gender diversity and inclusion issues. But I do not intend to steal more time to my speakers, so I pause here. Just the housekeeping information. I will introduce the speakers one by one, and I rather prefer to keep the questions at the end of the panel, not to interrupt the flow of presentation, and to give them enough time to express their views and their statements. So I now invite to take the floor Anna Wildt Persson. Anna is a Chief Strategist and Deputy Executive Director for Strategic Development with Trafikverket. I hope I spell it in correct way. The Swedish Transportation Administration. Anna is also working group leader of the Working Group 3 Organization of Staff and Human Resources within the PIARC Technical Committee 1.1, so the performance of transport administration. So Anna, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, Lina, yes, thank you very much for sharing the pictures. I looked at the participants, and I'm so glad that you are so many here and from very different places around the world. So it's very nice to have such a big audience for this theme. As Emanuela mentioned, I'm the co-working group leader for Working Group 3, together with Alexander Wolcher from Austria. And Working Group 3 deals with organization of staff and human resource, but our technical committee is focusing on a broader perspective on performance of transport administrations. We look at asset management, customer orientation, technical change, skills and competence. So the perspective of skills and competence and different dimensions of diversity and inclusion, including of course gender, is an important focus of our work on this PIARC cycle. So next slide, please. As you see from here, the framework for our work in Working Group 3 is specified in PIARC strategic plan. So the scope is in more detail to identify and investigate effective approaches for defining and promoting diversity and equity. And interlinked to this, of course, is the question of new talent and key competence. And we have also the task to find effective approaches to recruiting and retaining new talent. And I hope I can show you in this presentation that these two issues are very closely related. And we have been working with this during the cycle in different ways. We have made a literature review, and that's the one that Patrick Maléjac was mentioning. Diversity and talent management, the road to success. So if you're interested in that one, you can find it on PIARC website. And with this literature review as a starting point, we designed and we also arranged 5 roundtables with a global participation. We had participation from South America, North America, Africa, Europe, Middle East, Australia. And we talked about different aspects of diversity and equity. And gender was really very much a common thread through all the roundtables. And one of the 5 roundtables focused primarily also on gender equity. We had participants representing management level of Transport Administration, or other important organizations in the transport sector and academia. So it was a good set of participants in the roundtables, and we started the discussion from a theoretical framework and from our literacy study on diversity management and talent management. And after the roundtables, we collected more than 20 case studies, and we had, including 5 with a special focus on gender issues. We had case studies from Argentina, from Austria, from the US, from Paraguay, and from Sweden on gender equity. This is an ongoing work. Patrick Maléjac framed the PIARC cycle and the PIARC work, and we are in the middle of summarizing our results. But I will share some of the findings with you today from our roundtables and from our case studies. And of course, the results from them are not representative from all transport administrations, but I think they say very interesting things on what challenges and what needs the administration sees, and some good examples also on how to work on gender inclusion. So next slide, please. We started by asking the definition of gender equity, and from the answers of our roundtables and our case studies, you can see that different road or different transport administrations frame the definition or define gender equity a bit different, but there are of course also similarities. Some describe it as a state where women and men have the same possibilities, the same rights, and the same obligations. The recognition of gender equity and the promotion of gender equity is something that many administrations brings to the table. And it's also closely connected to the recognition of human rights, non-violence, equity and justice, and co-responsibility in caregiving tasks. And road or transport administrations also make reference to national laws, legislation that enhances equity and diversity in human resource. And I've brought into the slides some quotes from our roundtables and our case studies. And here is one: gender equity as the first ground of discrimination in the Discrimination Act. I mean, women and men constitutes 50-50% of the population, and discrimination of half of the population in any form is of course a ground for legislation. So you can see. Next slide, please. When we asked about different motives for working with gender inclusion and gender equity, here are some of the answers we got. Different motives. Sometimes administration stresses that it's a matter of being socially responsible, that gender equality is a cornerstone of establishing a non-discrimination HR policy and symmetrical relations. As I mentioned before, the legal aspect, of course, discrimination based on gender is illegal in many countries. But there are also more soft motives, like that it's a key HR policy to attract and retain employees. And it's also put forward as a measure of increased performance and increased innovation. You say that different groups were perceived to bring different solutions to the table. They improve the problem-solving abilities of the group. And diversity is also described as generating high trust environment and connected thinking. So it's also a matter of productivity and innovation. And customer orientation also seems to be an important motive for some administrations, together with representation. Here are also some quotes that it's important to mirror the society to ensure accurate representation. And also this one, you cannot be what you cannot see. Next slide, please. Challenges connected to the recruitment process include challenging in recruiting and retaining talent due to competition. And another challenge is the recruitment of the recruitment process is unconscious bias. We tend to hire the same kind of people because we often hire based on previous experiences. So this is something that is seen as a challenge. And in terms of representation, there's a challenge and a need for changing the culture and involvement in diversity initiatives on all levels. The administration also talks about a challenge connected to measuring. It's difficult to coordinate and prioritize the volume of different and various initiatives related to diversity and equity. But the most important step is perceived to be the development of strategies and creating commitment over time to establish a continuous process. And when the Transport Administration talks about needs in this regard, it's also very much a question of increasing the attractiveness of the sector for women and other underrepresented groups by working with employer branding, emphasizing on the benefits of working in transport. And in the search of new competence and key competence, it's described as important not to look for the most, or almost always the most technically skilled, but to focus more on emotional intelligence, adaptability, leadership, ability to think outside the box, networking, collaboration. And you see some quotes here that we must ensure commitment at the top and create leaders that understand and are committed to change. Next slide, please. And the represented organizations, they also, even though the approaches vary, there are some common threads. The organizations typically target the same practices: the recruitment procedures, the education of staff. Some say that we hire for skill and will. If people want to learn, they will. They focus on training of staff, of senior leaders and management to raise awareness, including language guidelines and internship. Flexible working conditions were suggested to attract women and other underrepresented groups, including both part-time and flexible work hours. They talk about succession planning, and also in terms of procurement, various strategies was implemented. For example, one organization secured work for different or designated groups through procurement by incentives and contracts. So gender equity goals on overall employment rate and on managerial levels were used. KPIs also as a strategy for getting gender equity or working with gender equity. And since we have been doing this work during the pandemic, we also have asked some questions on COVID-19, and I think almost the last slide tries to summarize. So the next slide tries to summarize some of the results on that. And there are different experiences of the effects of COVID-19 on gender equity. Some positive effects were mentioned: broadening the candidate pool through increased working flexibility, increased productivity was seen through flexible working hours, and also success in recruiting and retaining women and underrepresented groups. But there are also some negative effects that we found in our results and in our study. Women with a lion's share of the work at home, you saw that they had to juggle more when schools were closed, affecting on women's total workload. And the typical distribution of family responsibilities with narrow potential to choose location and plan working hours was seen to be exacerbated by the pandemic. So one can conclude that the pandemic and the new ways to work and recruit is a window of opportunity to generate novel responses to the new context, but you have to look out for the and try to handle the negative effects as well. So I think I have one last slide, just summarizing the next step of our work in the committee and our working group. We are doing further analysis of our case study, together with our results from the roundtables and conclusions on talent management, new talent, and key competence. And we will present our final report and publish it at the World Road Congress in Prague in 2022. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your great presentation and this great work of the working group 3 on the technical committee 1.1. This literature review and the case studies you were mentioning, I think they are really an insightful and reliable source of information for the PIARC members. And then you were highlighting something very important, to change the culture. And you said we must ensure the commitment at the top level, so to create leaders that understand and are committed to change. So thank you for your contribution, Anna. Let's continue our conversation. So I'm pleased to introduce to you Elma Albrieu from the Argentina Road Administration and also Vice President of PIARC, so female Vice President of PIARC. Congratulations for that, Elma. Elma is a civil engineer from the Catholic University of Cordoba, Argentina, with more than 25 years of experience in roadways, highways project construction and concession. And Emma will focus on a case study collected from Argentina in the same working group 3 organization of staff and human resources within the PIARC Technical Committee 1.1. So Emma, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon and good evening. It depends on you are right now. First of all, I have to say that I'm very happy to be here, not just for the invitation. Thank you, Emanuela and Anna, for that. I fully appreciate. But also because we are talking about some very, very important is gender inclusion. And I'm happy because of this, because, you know, the gender inclusion is very important right now. As Emanuela told before, I'm working in this industry from 25 years old, and I began in the field, in the construction field of the roadway, and nobody talk about these topics, and I have to make my own role to try to be in different positions in the administration. So Lina, if you can put the next slide, please. I'm living in Argentina. It's a country in South America, as you know. It's very huge, it's a very big country. Next, please. Slide, please. We have about 2.5 million kilometers square. And we have about 40,000 kilometers of road, a national road. If we consider the province and the other roads we have in our country, we have to multiply for 10 times. The 92% of our roads are pavement, so we have a very, very difficult task to do in our country. Next, please. I'm trying to introduce my country. In Argentina, we have about 46 million of population. The population is 46 million, and the employment rate is about, if you see the population and the employment rate, you can see why women make up half the population. Our employment rate remains lower, 41.9%. So we are more women and we have less employment in our country. Next, please. I find that some interesting figures in our country. I choose three agencies that are involved with the transport section. The National Road Security Agency, the Railway Infrastructure Management, and Vialidad Nacional, the National Roadways and Agency. You see, 30% of the workers, we are women. The rest are men. This is the media of this in the sector transport in Argentina, in the national administration. We are just the 30% of women working in this area. Next, please. The distribution of employment by gender in position in the national government in Argentina, if you see in the left part, we are the women, and in the left part, we are the men. You know, the coordinator, the second level, you are very close to the 50-50, less than 50-50. But when we are going to the ministry, we just have the 10% of ministries of Argentina are women. This is important to say also that we have a Ministry of Women in Argentina that was created in the last 2 years. Although we have the Ministry of Women in Argentina, the total ministry of our country are 10% women and 90% men. We are in a very sexist country, and as all of the Latin American countries are. The next, please. But we are some public policies with gender perspective in the National Road Agency that are new. They began in last year and in 2020, and it's very interesting to share with you. The next, please. In the National Roadway Administration, the administration creates a management unit of gender and diversity policies in our organization. There is an executive manager in National Roadway Administration that take care about the gender and diversity policies. It's under control of Paola Fedrizzi. It's a woman. She's a specialist in public policies, and is the manager of these topics in all of the country. This unit have the task to design and implement public policies with a gender perspective, facilitate tools and reconstruct common senses, ensure compliance with current regulation on gender, diversity, and violence in the world of work. Next one, please. There is a networking because of this unit of gender and diversity policies is in the center, is in Buenos Aires, but in each district of our country, we have about 24 districts in the country. There is people that are responsible for this task. So there is a networking in all of the country, not just in Vialidad Nacional, but its relation also with the Ministry of Public Works, with the trade unions, and with the Ministry of Women, Genders and Diversity of the nation that I mentioned before. Next, please. There is a law. Anna told before that there is a law we have to, of course, we have to use. In Argentina, in 2018, there is a new law. It's called Micaela Law, that is obligatory. All of the people who works in the public service, just in executive and legislative or in judicial public services, we have to train in. So in Vialidad Nacional, there is a group of people that are training. The training is very important to taking care what's happened with these things. And we have all of us, we are training in this new law, the Micaela law. Next, please. This law is because take care about the construction of equal workspaces. It seeks to prevent gender-based violence and promote adequate intervention of the work environment in national roadway. It has its own platform in Moodle, and there is more than 20 tutors in all of the country to trainee of this important law. It's absolutely new because it has about 4 years in the law. Next, please. In Vialidad Nacional, in National Road Agency, it creates a protocol of action for attention of gender violence and legal gender-based violence. This protocol is applicable in all of the cases in gender violence between workers in the National Roadway Agency. It proposes the prevention, punishment, and eradication of all forms of gender-based violence in the field here. And its implementation is exclusively in charge of the management unit in gender and diversity policy that it was created next year. This protocol, all of us, we are training in this new protocol, and they take care about 5 constraints from the implementations. Next one, please. The principles of this implementation of the protocol is zero tolerance, non-revictimization, approach focused in the person in a situation of violence, and confidentiality. In each province, we are 24, as I mentioned before, we have people who are taking care of this part of the protocol, and there is a very fluid channel, not just to make the constraint, but also to ask and to be help for this kind of people, for these people. Next, please. There is another thing that we are implementing in the National Road Agency, the non-sexist communication. There is a practical guide for a non-sexist use of the language. You know, gender mainstreaming is communication. Language is also part of the pool of social and cultural, and it's necessary to implement to advance higher equality. In Spanish, it is possible to do different strategies to speak a more gender inclusive way. So we are trying to change our form to communicate. Our writing communication, we are trying to transform it for more inclusive words. This guide avoid discriminatory expression, make gender visible when the communication situation, not making gender visible when the communication situation is not required. So we try to all of the 5,500 people who are working in the National Road Agency, try to change the form to write, the form to communicate. It's one of the things that we are changing right now. Next, please. You know, in Argentina, in 2015, 7 years ago, it was a demonstration. We call it in Spanish, Ni Una Menos, and began here. And all of 3 of June, we in Argentina, and it's going through all of Latin America, this movement. We take care, it's called Ni Una Menos because of the form to demonstrate that we are against the feminicide. In this year, next Friday, past Friday, it was June 3, We placed 113 road safety cones in each of the districts of Vialidad in national agency in order to make visible the femicide, the transfemicide, the transvesticide, the transhomicide, and other gender-based for your knowledge. In this year in Argentina, from 1 of January up right now, we have 113 femicide, but 110 femicide, 3 transfemicide, and it's terrible. It's a big pity for us, and in our national agency, we try to demonstrate that we are against, and we try to educate about this, and we try to take into account what is happening in our country. 1 death every 26 hours happened in our country in this year. It's terrible. These figures are very important, you know, not just the death, but you have, there is more than 123 daughters and sons without a mother. There are 65% of the deaths are minors. 65 were killed in their own home, and 58% of the aggressors were partners or ex-partners. It's very, 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 very sad. It's very, very pity. And we, this year, we participate in Ni Una Menos Day. Next, please. Equality in access to and permanence of employment. This is another law. Please, next, please. There is another law that it is in the National Plan of Equity and in Diversity. It's a law. It was from 2021 last year. It's a practical. It's a very important law that brought this law to promote access to formal employment and for travesties, transsexuals, and transgender people in treaties. Next one. And this law look for the equality in access to and to permanence and employment in national roadway. We have from last year up to now about 18. Right now we are 19 labor income into the federal administration. So they have to apply for profiles. The second step is a selection. The third step is to enter. And 4, and it's important, to permanence in this job. It's essential to work on the promotion of permanence so that once the entry is made, they can develop their job and access to fundamental right is the work. For us, it's new. This is the first national government organism that taking care of this important law in our country. Next, please. This is some numbers, some figures. You know, I'm an engineer and I like numbers. If you see in the table, in 2020, we are in our agency, we are about 5,370 people working here. The 26% were we are women and 74% men. That's the same figures that I showed you before when we talk about national agency relating to the transportation. And now in 2022, we are 5,492, and we are 27% women, and the rest of the are the men, and we have the 19 I told you before, the TTT people who are into it. If we see the hierarchy, the position, the low and the middle position, we can see that the 35% we are women in 2020 and 2022. So the axis, so we are 26% of women, and the 35% are in middle and lower manager post. So it's not so difficult to access this kind of manager position in our agency. Next one. I show you the different parts of our organization and how many women and how many males are in each part. It's important that, you know, in the as more higher position is more difficult the access to the women. So the next one please. And this is important. I'm an executive manager. I'm an executive manager in national agencies for planning projects and concession. I'm one of the 3 women in the National Roadway Administration. We are 3. So just the 27% we are women in the executive manager position, and they are 8 male in this position. Next one, please.
And Emma, I'm sorry to interrupt. If you can jump to the conclusion, otherwise we risk not to have enough time for the other 2 speakers and also for the question and answer time. Thank you so much for your understanding.
Yes. I'm finishing right now. I'm finishing right now. Next one, please. This is something that Anna told before, the importance to have the opportunity and good places for work. We have a reconciliation of work with caregiving staff. This is very important. We just have one of the lactancy mobile in the left. You can see is for women. They are working in the field. So we accompany safe nutrition practices, and we try. This is the first one, and we are trying to have for each province one of these for find very for 5 places that the women we can work more, and we can share the mothers the living and the worker living. So next one, please, and maybe I finish. Thank you very much. I try to show you what we are doing right now in Argentina, what we are trying to do, and you know, we know that it's very difficult in the country, in the sexist country, while we try to. We have to share this and to try to share what happened in each country to try to implement in ours. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emma, for this comprehensive picture of Argentina, and also the situation of the transportation sector, very male-dominated, as Latin American countries. I would add also my country, Italy, and Southern Europe. But yes, you also spoke about progress. So this Vialidad Nacional with a specific unit on gender and diversity policies, and this law, this Micaela law on the mandatory gender training. So thanks a lot for your contribution. We saw the work of our PIARC members. We now move to the PIARC partners. I'm glad to invite to take the floor Sharon Masterson with the International Transport Forum. Sharon is leading the ITF Corporate Partnership Board mechanism for engaging with the private sector, including its gender work stream. Sharon has over 20 years of international experience in the technology and transportation sector. So Sharon, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emanuela, and thank you for the invitation to be here with you all today to speak about the International Transport Forum and the work that we do with our corporate partnership board members. Next slide. So just to give you a little bit before we start, just to tell you a little bit about the International Transport Forum, for those of you who are not familiar with it, we are an intergovernmental organization with 64 member countries. We're a think tank for transport policy, and we look at all modes of transport globally. And we're a platform for pre-negotiation of policy issues. So why are we looking at the topic of gender and transport? Why is it important? There are many, many reasons. Today I'm going to focus on 4 of them. Next slide, please. Some of the speakers have spoken about these in their presentations as well. The areas I'd like to focus on are users, market, workforce, and professional development. I think the first and the most important thing to say is that women are not a minority group. We've heard that from other speakers. We represent over 50% of the world's population, so half of the world's transport users, and therefore also half of the world's market. So probably worth focusing on this market share aspect, I think, because we don't look at it very often from this angle. In terms of the workforce, women remain very underrepresented in most transport-related industries, with only 17% of female employees on average across a sample of 46 member countries of the ITF that we did in a member country survey. But as we face shortages of workers in several areas across the transport sector, we really do need to look at this untapped pool of talent. Next row, please. So what is our role in ensuring a pipeline of people interested in working in the transport sector? How can we get involved in ensuring that the transport sector is an interesting place to work? Next slide, please. I'd just like to speak to you a little bit about the work that we've done with the International Transport Forum's Corporate Partnership Board, but I'll tell you a little bit about what that is first. The Corporate Partnership Board is the ITF's official platform for engagement with the corporate sector. The members of the Corporate Partnership Board work with us to give input into policy discussions upstream on topics, many topics, for example, decarbonising transport. And the aim is really to ensure that policymakers are holistically informed ahead of important policy and regulatory decisions with the work that we do at the ITF. Next slide. The board is comprised of member companies from a number of different areas across the transport field and associated areas. So not just transport, but also IT, energy, insurance, etc. Next slide, please. Given the fact that these are large companies and for the most part, in total, the Corporate Partnership Board members have employees of nearly 3 million people. So diversity and inclusion really is a key topic for them, which led us to, in 2019, setting up a work stream on International Women's Day to particularly address the theme of transport and gender. Next slide, please. We started in 2019 with a workshop on hiring and retaining a diverse workforce. And the minutes of this meeting are to be found on our website, as is most of the work that we've undertaken at the ITF. You're welcome to browse it there. But I really wanted to highlight just a few things that we found from that workshop. One was making the transport sector more attractive to women is not just an aim, it's critical for business. So I mentioned the female workforce as an untapped pool, and foreseen staff shortages really in some areas of transport mean it is important to focus recruitment on 100% of the workforce market. We need to raise awareness about the diverse range of job opportunities in transport and mobility. I think that's the job for all of us. We very often focus on STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths when we speak about jobs in the transport sector. But the transport sector is much more broad than that, and we should highlight the jobs in other areas also. Ensure inclusive recruitment, and I know someone spoke about that earlier as well. some of the companies that we work with have told us that they've refocused their efforts on the content of the job adverts. They've revised their company mission statements and values to attract the workforce of the future. And this just doesn't apply to the gender aspect. This applies to the workforce in general. So different generations are looking for different things out of jobs. They're not looking for the same thing as their parents or grandparents. And I think we need to focus on that and really understand what they're looking for and how they might be able to find their role in the transport sector. And an example of that might be that younger people are looking for jobs looking at climate change, for example. Of course, we have a huge challenge in decarbonising transport in the transport sector, and one of the hard to abate sectors is indeed the area of heavy road freight. So this might be an opportunity to reach out to young people and say, you know, this is an important area, you want to make a difference, come and work with us in the transport sector and help us address those problems. Next slide, please. In 2021, we had a workshop on optimizing women's networks. So many of your companies, your associations will have a women's network. And really understanding how these can be used properly is crucial to their success. It's not just having a network for the sake of having a network and ticking that box. It really should be understanding how companies can create the conditions in which also their male workers understand that without their engagement in women's network, gender equality will not happen. And Patrick mentioned the good balance or the good participation that we have today on the webinar of male colleagues. So we're delighted to see that. But companies must also create the conditions in which their male workers understand that this engagement will not happen. When we talk about the women as users of transport and products, for example, it's important that we understand that this network can be somewhere that companies can go to really gain insights into future products and services aimed at this market segment. And here we just see some quotes from some of the participants of the workshop 2 years ago. Next slide, please. I spoke earlier about career and professional development in the 4 items that I'd speak about today. This is something that I think we all have a role to play in. So looking at gender biases in career advice and where can we really become engaged and what are the things we should be looking at? So we know that very often we're engaging at university level at the early career stages, but maybe we should be engaging a lot earlier than that, because it really is at an earlier age, a much earlier age, that career choices are made in many, or at least decided upon in many ways, in that subject choices are happening in early teenage years, without the children at that stage understanding what the impacts on later educational paths and career choices can be. So not picking a subject in school, for example, can mean then that you are constrained if you want to study a STEM career at a later stage. We also need to embrace innovative methods and technologies in companies, in organizations. When we go to visit universities and schools, we've done that very much in person in the past, and that is a resource-intense activity. But I think now we've learned a lot with COVID. Here we are in a webinar, for example, with a lot of people able to be present with us here today. Why don't we look at how online and video conferencing tools can reach schools and universities? So not only does this allow access to information and this kind of a situation for more students, but also allows your staff to participate while minimizing time lost due to travel. And this is particularly important for, there is a lot happening, I suppose, in urban areas. There are a lot of companies, there are a lot of schools, but in rural areas, there may not be as many companies or associations, organizations to visit those schools. So this might be a way of really having a diversity outreach when you're reaching out to students. And that's just bringing me into my third point of diversifying geographical outreach to schools and universities. Again, students are influenced by what they see around them. If they don't have role models, they won't understand what the transport sector is and what kind of opportunities there are for them. Ensure students are taught the right skill. It's possible to engage with educational institutions to ensure the curriculum covers vital aspects for future skills and workplace needs. and also consider engaging in non-formal education. In the workshop that we did, one of the companies had mentioned that they had looked at women who were starting a career, in fact, in Pakistan, who they helped to become drivers. It's not a given in Pakistan that women drive, so there are very few drivers at the moment, but increasing. And this company in particular had taken this on board and said, you know, we will help train women to be drivers. That gives them the opportunity to be drivers as users of the transport system, but also as potential employees, you know, as drivers within the transport system. Next slide, please. So at the ITF, right across the house, we speak about how we can make transport more inclusive. And we've just had a summit on inclusive transport in May in Leipzig, and we were delighted to have our colleagues from PIARC present at that. Next slide, please. One of the things we launched at our annual summit of ministers was the gender analysis toolkit for transport policies. Now, this was developed with some of our member countries, with Canada, the UK, Ireland, and our stakeholders in the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and the European Commission. Next slide, please. So the ITF considers that gender analysis is the first step to achieving gender equality, and helps to create a better understanding of the effectiveness of transport policies and how their impact could vary by gender. So we at the ITF did a survey of member countries, which showed that countries needed more guidelines to show how to collect gender data and how also to design policies with gender in mind. This is why we've designed the toolkit with an easy to use method to incorporate a gender perspective across transport policies and projects. There's a checklist to help assess gender dimension with a scoring system to benchmark the project, indicators that list several different indicators to choose from which might be relevant to the project. And then there's a questionnaire, a template questionnaire to design surveys and data collection processes. And this is on the ITF website. It's a dynamic tool. It's there to be further improved, so don't hesitate to use it and also to send us feedback. We'd be very grateful for that. Our Secretary General has announced also that this toolkit will be implemented across all ITF projects and initiatives. And we will use it to ensure that our own policy research and data collection incorporates gender as a key consideration. Next slide, please. So we at the ITF believe that policy dialogue is very important to move any topic forward. Next slide, please. We believe that in order to advance our societal and policy goals, collaboration with all stakeholders is important. We, of course, are here with PIARC today. We're delighted to have PIARC participate in our annual consultations, in our annual summit, and several of you, I'm sure, that are online on this also, we're working with quite closely. For gender, for example, we have a consultation each year with key stakeholders. Here on screen, for example, you will also see different gender dialogues that we have on the top left-hand corner at COP26. And then we have two images of our summit. We have a side event by the World Bank. Then under that, we have our 2022 summit, which was on inclusion, which also focused and tried to mainstream across the different sessions, gender. And then we also have our publication, Transport Innovation for Sustainable Development, where several countries, several international organizations, associations, PIARC has also contributed to that policy dialogue and publication. So really, right across the work that we're doing at the ITF, we are going to mainstream gender through it. We're talking constantly with our member countries, with our corporate partnership board, and with all of our other stakeholders, and how we can do that better, and how we can do that better together. So thank you very much for the invitation, and I'll hand it back to Emanuela.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Awesome presentation. Really very, very interesting. This involvement, you were talking about the involvement of your corporate partnership board committed to diversity and inclusion. I liked a lot this gender analysis toolkit for transport policies. I think it's also a very useful source of information. And yes, we will continue working together to exchange views and cooperate in this field. So thank you again. And as I said in the beginning, PIARC has also a great partnership with TRB, Transportation Research Board, and I'm very happy to welcome Hilary Nixon, TRB Chair of Standing Committee Women and Gender in Transportation. Hilary is Deputy Executive Director and Miniature Transportation Institute at San Jose State University, and she oversees a research program focusing on improving mobility of people and goods and ensuring that transportation system is safe, efficient, accessible, and convenient for all. Hilary will share with us the initiatives and the actions undertaken by TRB with regard to gender diversity. And so, Hilary, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emanuela. One of the advantages of going last is you get to hear these absolutely wonderful presentations from my colleagues and see how much synergy there is as it relates to this topic. So I'm really here to give you a quick overview of what we do at the Transportation Research Board's Committee on Women and Gender in Transportation. So next slide, please. So one of the things that we try to do with all of our meetings, our communication, and this was something that was mentioned also by my colleague earlier today, Emma, is thinking about inclusive gender language. So we always start with a slide similar to this, where we talk about how do we, as an organization, as a committee, in our own work, be mindful of language as in terms of gender inclusivity, because while we started as a committee on women in transportation, we have evolved into a committee that really does respect and want to work with and conduct research reflecting all genders. Next slide, please. So a little bit about Transportation Research Board. I wasn't sure how much. I know that there are a few members here today who are intimately involved with the organization, but I wanted to give you just a quick overview perspective of where we are and how we sit within the broader national academies. So in the United States, it's an independent, non-governmental organization called the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And it really is established to provide objective advice to inform policy with evidence-based information. And within the national academies, there are 7 major program areas. One of those is the Transportation Research Board. And our role here at TRB is really this focus on, leadership and transportation improvements and innovations, focus on impartial, evidence-based information exchange, research, which I'll talk more about in a little bit, and advice on all modes of transportation. So floating, flying, driving, pedaling, walking, all the modes we cover. Next slide, please. So my committee, which is the Standing Committee on Women and Gender in Transportation, we formed out of a strong interest actually historically in safety. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the safety work that we have done, but across all committees in the Transportation Research Board, because that is really the structure for this organization. We have an executive committee, and then I think there are something on the order of about 175 individual committees that focus on anything and everything you could think of related to transportation. And all of the committees have, to a certain extent, a similar set of responsibilities. We propose research, and I'll talk a little bit about an upcoming research project that came as a result of work that we proposed through the Women and Gender and Transportation Committee. We engage in sharing research findings, sponsor special activities. Every year in January in Washington, D.C., 10,000 plus of our friends and colleagues in the transportation world gather for our annual meeting. And a major effort of all of the committees is to develop workshop sessions for that event. In addition, there's also special conferences that might be focused on a smaller, narrow aspect of transportation that take place throughout the year, and of course serve to provide a forum to discuss transportation issues. The nice thing about the committee structure is you have usually a set of anywhere between 25 and 35 official committee members who serve anywhere between a 3-year term up to maybe 9 years as a committee member. But then we have an incredibly wide number of friends, and I would certainly encourage all of you to become a friend of various TRB committees, and I've got a link to that at a little bit later on. And I think I just saw that Christos also posted in the chat about how to become more involved with TRB. Certainly at our committee, we are looking for diversity. We want to focus on inclusion, intersectionality. So how we are working with, women, non-binary, individuals of color, a geographic breadth, as well as expertise in, as I mentioned, TRB covers all aspects of transportation, so a wide range of expertise and sector. So whether you are in academia, consulting, you work for a government organization, anything like that. And I have posted the website for the committee on this slide. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that I would talk a little bit about some of the research priorities that we have within the committee. And here's a list. We actually recently went through our strategic planning process with the committee. So this is updated to the current priorities that we're working on. Certainly travel behavior. And I know that one of my colleagues today in this webinar talked about women's travel behavior, particularly as it relates to caregiver travel, trip chaining. We know that women take more trips. They often have much more complicated trips, which certainly can place a burden if they're having to use multimodal travel and having to balance the need to connect different modes and things like that. We actually historically came out of a safety committee as part of TRB with strong interest, both in terms of personal safety, how do we reduce, eliminate sexual harassment, assaults that women and other genders face, whether they are on transit, walking on the streets, that kind of thing, as well as safety in terms of vehicle equipment safety. There's been a fair amount of research done by committee members and their associates as it relates to women's safety. When you think about test dummies and things like that, and there's an entire area of research on how do we improve vehicle safety for women when you're often not using a test dummy that reflects the shape, the structure of a wider range of genders. And then certainly an important issue on human trafficking and the impacts that women and non-binary individuals face as it relates to human trafficking. We've heard a lot today about workforce development and how do we create more opportunities for women to enter, to stay, and be promoted within the transportation workforce. So that's another key area that we work on. And then also thinking about emerging technology. And when we think about innovations in transportation, what will be the impacts on women and all genders as it relates to things like micromobility, connected autonomous vehicle. And then we're also incredibly honored within the committee structure at TRB, you could also have subcommittees. And several years ago, it was recognized that an important area that has been overlooked and neglected is on mainstreaming gender data. So we have a subcommittee that is focused specifically on mainstreaming gender data. We've participated in several workshops at the annual meetings on how do we do as researchers, as representatives of the transportation community, on collecting better gender data and ensuring that that is a standard part of our operations. I hope it hasn't been decided yet, but I'm fairly certain there will be a workshop on gender data coming up in the January 2023 annual meeting. So please keep an eye out for that. And next slide. There we go. So I mentioned I would talk briefly about some of the other activities we are going on within the the Transportation Research Board, we have a variety of what are called cooperative research programs where we engage in funded research. And one of them is part of the National Cooperative Highway Research Program. And we have a new synthesis study that has just been announced. In fact, we are putting together a panel who will select the consultants. So there's an opportunity to receive funding to do work on practices to promote gender equity in the Department of Transportation workforce. So that would be across the state departments of transportation in the United States. I am most excited to announce that we will be having our 7th international conference. That will be coming up in fall 2024. I would love to have all of you involved in that. We're putting together the steering committee now, and then there'll be a call for papers and proposals for sessions and for activities forthcoming. So we would absolutely welcome, all of your involvement in that event. Our 6th international conference was held in 2019 in Irvine, California. We have often had these conferences. We've had the conferences in Paris before, we've had them in the United States. So we really do value international involvement in these events. And in 2021, we published an e-circular through TRB that came out of that 6th international conference. And you can download it. If you just throw that into Google, you will be able to search for it and find it. And it's a wonderful summary, not only of the conversations that took place and the research presentations that occurred during the 6th conference, but gaps and where we need to go in terms of next steps for research on women and gender and transportation. Our committee meetings are wide open. So, please join us as a friend. Participate, speak up. We just love to broaden the participation in our events. And then we have a few other activities. We run webinars, workshops, as well as sessions at the annual meeting. And I'm going to wrap up. Next slide, please. And so that we have a chance to have some conversations. So that is the website if you want to join and become a friend of not only the Women and Gender Committee, but any of the other committees. And you're certainly welcome also to reach out and contact me via email. And I will wrap up so we can have some questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hilary, for showing all these activities and initiative of the Committee on Women and Gender in Transportation of TRB, also for your enthusiasm. And I think we will sign up to be friends of this committee. And also I would like to highlight, you said something very important in the beginning of your presentation, the importance of using a gender inclusive language in our sector. So I think this is also a key element to be taken into account in our activity. So I would like to thank the whole panel and a virtual round of applause for everybody. They've been good in time. We still have almost 10 minutes. I encourage the audience to ask questions. I saw in the chat that something was already answered, and Sharon was putting information on the ITF Corporate Partnership Board and also the gender toolkit. I saw also conversation about the truck drivers in Isabel Metri from the Hand Haulers Association and IRO, and also it was I think it was not a question, that's a comment also from C. Morello from the US, but I see Patrick raising the hand. So our Secretary General, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Emanuela, and congratulations to every one of the panelists for the really great presentations. I have a question, and I would like to tap everyone's knowledge here. So, at PIARC, we are focused on roads. So, for example, the fact that that women don't feel safe on buses, it's a sad story, but it's not really PIARC's problem. Has anyone done work on gender inclusion and infrastructure, for example? We have various committees like road safety, and clearly there's work to be done there. We have a committee that works on the workforce and make recommendations. Clearly there's lots of work to be done there. But I'm curious to know, has anyone worked on infrastructure, for example, pavements topics and gender, or bridges topics and gender? Or is this something that we just maybe should say, okay, this is not going to be the #1 priority for PIARC about gender inclusion. I'm really curious about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Who wants to start from the panel?
So I guess I just needed a clarification, Patrick. So are you thinking more about women, gender, and the physical infrastructure of pavement, or women working necessarily in those fields, whether they are working in infrastructure, engineering, pavement science, that kind of thing?
We have with my PIARC hat on, right? So we have one committee that will make recommendations for PIARC members about workforce in general, and maybe with more specific recommendations for workforce in this type of industry or that type of industry. We have committees like maybe half of them, slightly less than half of them, they would make recommendations to PIARC members on infrastructure type of activities like pavements, recycled pavements, for example. And we will encourage all of our committees to take gender considerations into account in their work. Maybe not today, but very, very soon. So about pavements, like has anyone worked on gender considerations for pavements or for bridges, like technical things, recommendations?
Hi, Sharon here. I'm sure I'm sure somebody has. I'm not aware of whether we have done it or not, and not to my knowledge. But one of the things that consistently comes up in these kind of conversations is about the infrastructure in terms of lighting on pavements, on roads, etc. And one thing I'd like to highlight also, that sometimes your road is your pavement. I mean, if you go to many rural areas, there are no pavements. You know, it is the road that you will walk along at night, or coming home from school, etc. So I just think that's an interesting area as well, just to bear in mind. But a lot of the work that we've seen has been based on the lighting of that infrastructure and how safe people feel that they are.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I think I would add. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, may I interrupt you? I'm from Sweden, working at Swedish Transport Administration. And it's a very good question, because I have just thinking about it before. I mean, the women, when they are beginning, the beginning stage in all infrastructure is planning, the planning process. We have to encourage women in the planning process, because in the planning process, you have access to the economy, the financial, you have access to the knowledge, and you have even access to the main plan, the main plan for the cities or for the urban planning. So it's very, very important point of view to just make a focus on that issues, women in the planning sector. And I mean, it's a beginning, because it's a beginning to include women in the maintenance sector. It's a beginning to include women to the projection sections, or to make financial in the road transport system. So, and it needs, because it's most in Sweden, by traditional, it was most from the beginning before 10, 15 years ago, it was very, very man-dominated, this category, the planning system. It was very man-dominated, but we, or the Swedish transport authorities, they have worked to just on this gender equality, just to introduce more women, because the men that worked in the planning, they have a lot of experience, many years of experience, and experience in financial, experience in technical experience, in AutoCAD experience, how to use systems. And that was very, very difficult to introduce. But now in Trafikverket, we call Trafikverket, we have almost more women in the planning systems. And the women that coming from, because I'm from Iraq, but I'm working in Sweden, I know that is a lot of stereotypes that women that is in just this sector. Of course, it would be very, very great things to introduce in the Middle East, that kind of experience. And it's the first step. I think, my opinion is the first step to, sorry.
Thank you, Nada.
Thank you.
Other comments? I could add, Anna here, I could add, it's also a question of customer orientation and the product that you serve as a transport administration or road administration. I mean, you deliver the pavement, but in fact you deliver the service of accessibility or mobility or accessibility. So maybe the result, the standard that you are deciding on for the road surface or for the pavement or for the road in itself would be different if you had if you had experts that were a diverse workforce and staff, and also planning, of course, that Nada mentioned. So I think it's also a question of customer orientation and the product that the transport administrations deliver. So there is definitely a connection between the infrastructure and gender equity and diversity in general, I think.
Thank you, Anna. I see a couple of questions from the chat. We take these two questions before the end. There is a question from Nidhi Prabha. As a gender and transit practitioner from South Asia, what mechanism you think can help deter the cultural barriers to feminization of the transport sector? Who wants to answer from the panelists?
I think I'll jump in, because I think that this is such an important question. And when we've all talked about the fact that there is such a small number of women within the transportation field and the work that we are doing, you can't always be, or we as women, individuals who identify as women, can't be the only ones who are asking these questions. And how do you have the allies, the male allies, to stand up, speak out in terms of how do we make this a priority? People like Patrick, who's here today, and Christos and Steve. How do we ensure that those voices are getting that seat at the table so that they're speaking up as well as allies, and that mentorship across the board and buy-in at all levels, from the CEOs down to the frontline workers?
Thank you, Hilary. Other comments from the panelists? Patrick?
I was not a panelist, but I would like to highlight that Sharon's presentation was really, really great in that respect, I would like to say. So Hilary rephrased the question. And Sharon gave us examples. So I think Sharon's presentation makes business, it's a good business case. My guess is that if we come to people and say, please use this cute language and use this nice multicolor logo and things, it's just going to look cute. But if you say it makes business sense and you're going to do a better job, then that's a powerful message. That's a powerful message. And I think this is really something to build on, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Just to jump in on that, and that's really why I highlighted it, because when we talk about gender, it often sounds like we're giving lip service to a minority group, but there are many ways to look at it, and looking at it from a business perspective really makes sense. I mean, automobile manufacturers have done that. They know that the decision-making in many countries is 61% female. So they really do need to cater to that market to get that market share. So it's not about, just ticking the box. It's really about identifying the market share, identifying the untapped pool of talent, and really serving more than 0.5% of the citizens. And if we think a lot about women and their modal choices and how they very often don't travel alone, but bring maybe a lot of the family with them and an extended family to care, etc., then it is women that are making a lot of the choice in how people move around on a daily basis. So thanks for highlighting that.
Thanks a lot. I would take the last question from the chat from Adriana Beatriz Garcia. What barriers to improving global inclusion do you find in international integration? Who wants to take that? Short question, actually.
Sorry, Emanuela, what was it? What careers?
What barriers to improving global inclusion do you find? And then she had international integration. I don't know if Adriana is online and she wants to read more on this question, maybe. No?
No, maybe I'll jump in and just quickly, in case anyone else wants to, and just say really it's about awareness raising of what it is and what it means and how we can go about it, because I think that it's not something that people don't do on purpose. You know, it's something that we really need, like many other things. They need to be highlighted. We need to identify the gaps, and then we need to collaborate and start working on them. But I think knowledge is a huge part of bridging that gap and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sharon. I think we are a little bit over our time. I'd like to thank you again. I mean, these are excellent speakers, these are panel, all the participants, and just to wrap up some, some thoughts and reflections on my notes. We were talking about changing the culture. So to ensure the commitment of the top level to create leaders that understand and are committed to change. We're talking about training. Emma was talking about training in public administration. We spoke about involvement, so involving and be committed to diversity and inclusion, and also the importance that Hilary was mentioning about the gender inclusive language in our sector. I think we had lots of food for thought, lots of insightful and very important messages. We will wrap up all this reflection and make a report to everybody, and yes, we will continue this conversation. I think this probably will be, it is the first webinar of our team. I speak about on the behalf of the team on gender diversity and inclusion, but I think also for PIARC that we will continue our conversation and this partnership with international organizations. So thank you so much again. I don't know, Patrick, if you want to have a final word of wisdom.
Thank you. It was really interesting. We're looking for ideas about what PIARC could do as an organization for PIARC processes. Maybe this could be tackled in future webinars as well. But it's good to be part of a community that addresses a very important question that matters for every road organization across the globe. Thank you, Emanuela, and thank you, Lina, for this webinar.